This program is supported by SMC Global Power.
Hello, I'm Alva Angeles, and you're watching Eagle News International. Good evening, CJ.
Good evening, Alma, and good evening to everyone joining the broadcast. Here are the headlines.
Third quarter of 2021.
The Philippine economy grew more than expected in the third quarter.
Former U.S. President Barack Obama said he understood why young people were frustrated with climate inaction from leaders and called on them to stay angry in the fight against climate change.
Davao City Mayor Sara Duterte withdrew her candidacy for the mayoralty race in Davao City.
And thousands of demonstrators marched on the New Zealand Parliament to protest against COVID-19 restrictions.
First in our news, the Philippine economy grew more than expected in the third quarter, according to the government, as a rebound in consumer spending overcame pandemic lockdowns and other restrictions to rein in the fast-spreading COVID Delta variant. Socioeconomic Planning Secretary Carl Chua said the third quarter growth validated the government's approach to fighting COVID with strict containment measures. Take a look.
In the third quarter of 2021, we contained the Delta variant and sustained our economic expansion, even as stringent quarantines were in place. Our strategy was correct. The results are clear. The Philippine economy grew by 7.1% year-on-year in the third quarter. This is up from the negative 11.6% in the same period last year. This is among the highest third quarter growths in the ASEAN and East Asian region. On a seasonally adjusted quarter-on-quarter basis, the economy expanded by 3.8%. This indicates sustained recovery despite 2 weeks of the ECQ and a month of the MECQ in the country's economic centers. While observing the health protocols, our people continued to work and businesses continued to operate. At the same time, we saw the new daily infection fall from a peak of 26,000 on September 11 to less than 1,800 last November 4. This is due to the rapid inoculation drive from July to September, where about 19 million Filipinos were fully vaccinated. This careful balancing between COVID-19 and non-COVID-19 needs led to the continued expansion of most sectors. With strong third quarter growth and overall performance in 2021, we are on track to reach the high end of our 4 to 5% growth target for 2021. Year-to-date growth is currently at 4.9%. With adequate supply of vaccine doses, the government is further accelerating the vaccination program over the next few weeks. With current trends, we expect to achieve Alert Level 1 by the onset of the new year. To further sustain our growth this year and next year, further accelerate the vaccination program, reopen to Alert Level 1 in January 2022, and maximize the use of the 2021 budget.
More than 2.8 million people have been infected in the Philippines, with more than 44,000 deaths, but cases have fallen sharply in recent weeks to levels last seen in February, allowing the government to reopen parts of the economy.
Former U.S. President Barack Obama said Monday he understood why young people were frustrated with climate inaction from leaders and that most countries have failed to live up to promises they made in the Paris Agreement. Addressing young activists who cheered and filmed his speech on their smartphones, he said it was not easy being young today. He said that his generation's lack of urgency was a source or real source of anxiety and real anger. Take a look.
So to all the young people out there, as well as those of you who consider yourselves young at heart, I want you to stay angry. I want you to stay frustrated, but channel that anger. Harness that frustration. Keep pushing harder and harder for more and more, because that's what's required to meet this challenge. Gird yourself for a marathon, not a sprint. For solving a problem this big, this complex, and this important has never happened all at once. Since we're in the Emerald Isles here, let me quote the bard, William Shakespeare. "What wound," he writes, "did ever heal but by degrees?" Our planet has been wounded by our actions. Those wounds won't be healed today or tomorrow or the next, but they can be healed by degrees. And if we start with that spirit, if each of us can fight through the occasional frustration and dread, if we pledge to do our part and then follow through on those commitments, I believe we can secure a better future. We have to. And what a profound and noble task to set for ourselves. I'm ready for the long haul if you are. So let's get to work. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Now, in the 6 years since the Paris deal, which seeks to limit global heating to between 1.5 and 2 degrees Celsius, planet-warming greenhouse gas emissions have continued to mount. And an assessment last week said that carbon pollution will rebound this year to pre-pandemic levels. Former President Barack Obama admitted that some of their progress stalled when his successor, Donald Trump, chose to unilaterally withdraw from he called for the world to step up its emission cutting pledges at COP26 in Glasgow, and says the U.S. should lead the fight to limit global temperature rises. Take a look.
United States, of course, some of our progress stalled when my successor decided to unilaterally pull out of the Paris Agreement in his first year in office. I wasn't real happy about that. And yet, the determination of our state and local governments, along with the regulations and investment that my administration had already put in place, allowed our country to keep moving forward, despite hostility from the White House. As the world's second largest emitter of greenhouse gases, the U.S. has to lead. We have enormous responsibilities. And obviously, we still have a lot of work to do. What is also true is that collectively and individually, we are still falling short. We have not done nearly enough to address this crisis. We are going to have to do more. So, Paris showed the world that progress is possible, created a framework. Important work was done there, and important work has been done here. That is the good news. Now for the bad news. We are nowhere near where we need to be yet.
The former president also echoed current President Joe Biden in saying it was disturbing that neither the leaders of China or Russia had traveled to Glasgow.
Most nations have failed to be as ambitious as they need to be. The escalation, the ratcheting up of ambition that we anticipated in Paris 6 years ago has not been uniformly realized. I have to confess, it was particularly discouraging to see the leaders of two of the world's largest emitters, China and Russia, decline to even attend the proceedings. I understand that it's harder to get international cooperation. There are more global tensions. But there is one thing that should transcend our day-to-day politics and normal geopolitics, and that is climate change. It's not just that we can't afford to go backward, we can't afford to stay where we are. The world has to step up, and it has to step up now.
Meanwhile, staying at the summit, COP26 President Alok Sharma calls for a sense of urgency as UN climate talks enter their final week, with countries still worlds apart on key issues, including how rapidly the world curbs carbon emissions and how to help nations already impacted by global warming. Take a look.
Together, we face the arduous task of building political consensus between almost 200 countries. Finding consensus is not going to be straightforward, but the progress made last week demonstrates that a constructive spirit amongst negotiators exists, and here in Glasgow, we have a unique opportunity to reach a historic outcome, and I'm committed to bringing countries together. My priority now is pace. There needs to be a sense of urgency in all our negotiations. The science is clear, we have no time to lose, and I will ensure that negotiations proceed in a timely manner.
Tuvalu's Foreign Minister Simon Coffey calls for COP26 nations to urgently address climate change, standing mid-thigh in seawater from one of the countries most threatened by rising water levels. Tuvalu is a Pacific island country in the Polynesian sub-region of Oceania, situated about midway between Hawaii and Australia. Take a look.
In Tuvalu, we are living the realities of climate change and sea level rise as you stand watching me today at COP26. We cannot wait for speeches when the sea is rising around us all the time. Climate mobility must come to the forefront. We must take bold, alternative action today to secure tomorrow. Faftailasi, Tuvalu Modetua.
Meanwhile, one of India's rivers, the Yamuna, is coated with toxic foam, adding to the woes of New Delhi residents already enduring a blanket of thick smog over the capital. Take a look.
गवर्नमेंट की किसी की नहीं सुन रही, नहाते हैं, देख के चले जाते हैं, कुछ भी ना होता। और प्रदूषण में ये देखो ना, कितना धुआं आ रहा है, बीमारी जड़ है, पूरी बीमारी है इसमें, पूरा पानी आ रहा, पूरा केमिकल का पानी है।
The Yamuna is already one of the world's most polluted waterways in the country, but parts of the river, which courses through the center of Delhi, were coated in mounds of white foam resembling snowfall. The city government blamed the blight on heavy sewage and industrial waste discharged into the river from further upstream last week. The pollution did disrupt water supply to part of the city, according to local officials who did not say how many households had been affected. And the news continues here on Eagle News. CJ and I will be back right after this.
Isa ang Southeast Asia sa nangunguna sa industriya ng supply chain management. Ngunit dahil sa COVID-19 crisis na apektuhan ito, government restrictions have led companies to suspend operations and shut down factories. This is all happening while the manufacturing sector is already struggling with rising raw material costs. Paano nga ba makakabangon ang mga kumpanya? In this episode, we'll find out with our guest, Mr. George Santiago, General Manager of RS Components, as we discuss supply chain resiliency.
Companies should start with adopting digital transformation. But the good thing is, maganda yung competition, so maraming services and solutions that were made available.
All these in this episode of Open for Business.
Hanggang kailan maghihintay, pangarap kong pag-ibig. O hanggang kailan kaya kablang sa aking panaginip.
Hello everyone, I am Carmela Ariola and please catch me on Letters and Music on air and online November 13, 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. Only here in Net 25. See ya!
Hi, this is Nadia Montenegro.
Always remember to cook with your heart.
Masarap talaga siya.
Yay!
From Kusina ni Nadia.
Welcome back to the news. Davao City Mayor Sara Duterte withdrew her candidacy for the mayoralty race in Davao City on Tuesday, a few days before the November 15 deadline for substitution of candidacies for the 2022 national and local elections. In a Facebook post, the presidential daughter said she would no longer seek re-election as Davao City Mayor and that she would be substituted by her brother, Vice Mayor Sebastian Baste Duterte, who would be running as mayoralty bet in her place. Mayor Sara's withdrawal of candidacy as Davao City Mayor mayoral bet came after speculations that she would be pursuing a national post and be a substitute candidate in the national elections. Her Facebook post announcing her decision did not give details, however, on what would be her next move. Last October 23, Mayor Sara met with presidential aspirant, former Senator Ferdinand Marcos Jr. in Cebu City. After that, on October 25, PDP Laban standard bearer Senator Ronald Bato de la Rosa met with the Davao City Mayor to remind her of the November 15 substitution deadline of the COMELEC or the Commission on Elections. De la Rosa, who had been a last-minute PDP Laban standard bearer, has been vocal in saying that he would give way if Mayor Sara would decide later to run for the presidency in the 2022 national elections. However, there are also those pushing for a Bongbong Marcos-Sara Duterte tandem for the 2022 polls.
Staying here in the country, Malacanang urged all the local government units or LGUs to respect President Duterte's current policy on the wearing of face shields in the country. This after Manila Mayor Isko Moreno Domagoso signed an executive order limiting the mandatory use of face shields to hospital settings, medical clinics, and other medical facilities. Let's listen in.
Alam ko lang po ay nagpulong po ang mga Metro Manila mayors at ang sa akin naman po, idaan lang sa tamang proseso. Ako po ang personal na paninindigan ko, dapat talaga tanggalin na ang face shield. Pero idaan natin sa proseso, antayin natin yung desisyon ng IATF. Dahil pag tayo hindi nag-antay na dumaan sa proseso, baka wala nang sumunod doon sa mga pulisiya ng IATF. No? So ang pagkakaalam ko lang po, parang hindi ata nakadala si Mayor Yorme doon sa pagpupulong ng MMDA, bagamat rekomendasyon din po ng mga mayors sa Metro Manila, sa IATF, na tanggalin na nga po ang face shield. Yan nga po ang aking sinasabi, no? Kapag nagkanya-kanya tayo, mawawala po yung ating tinatawag na, kumbaga, yung ultimate executive power na ina-exercise po ng Presidente. Lahat naman po ng lokal na pamahalaan ay kabahagi po ng executive branch of government. No? So sa akin po, kung ayaw nyo talagang sumunod, siguro pagpapakita lang ng respeto sa proseso dahil pinakikinggan naman po ang boses ng lahat.
Secretary Roque appealed to LGUs to wait for the Interagency Task Force for the Management of Emerging Infectious Diseases, the final decision, which will also be approved by the President. Secretary Roque cautioned that a new face shield policy issued by any LGU might prompt the public to disregard the President's directive to continue wearing it in enclosed spaces.
Thousands of demonstrators marched on the New Zealand Parliament Tuesday to protest against COVID-19 restrictions. Watch this.
Meanwhile, emotional scenes at the U.S. airport. It had been 2.5 years since Allison had not hugged her son, Liam, who lives in New York. At the JFK airport, the British family finally reunites. The travel ban to the U.S. has been lifted for vaccinated travelers. Take a look.
It's unbelievable. It's been so long. It's been so long. Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
I can't believe it. I just can't. Every day we've been watching the news and the radio and the newspapers, waiting and waiting for America to open up, and then all of a sudden, it was like, book the flights.
It's been really tough. It's been really tough. Obviously communicating on Zoom, but it's not the same as in real life, right? So looking forward to seeing them in person.
Oh, it was the first day available. I started a new position and I've been stuck in London throughout and I needed to travel, so glad to be here.
Yes, the North Atlantic is a very important market for us. We're flying to 17 cities today. That will grow to 23 by December. And we used to fly to 30 cities back in 2019. So we had the largest direct network across the North Atlantic to the United States. And it's something that we're keen to rebuild as quickly as we can. Well, our sense is demand should be getting back there by 2023-24. But we will be looking to reinstate all of our frequencies back on the North Atlantic by Q3 of this year.
Lifting the travel ban will affect more than 30 countries, but U.S. entry will not be unregulated. Authorities plan to closely monitor travelers' vaccination status and will still require them to present negative COVID tests. Starting Monday, vaccines will be required for non-essential trips, including family visits or tourism, although unvaccinated travelers will still be allowed in for essential trips. A second phase, beginning early January, will require all visitors to be fully vaccinated to enter by land. U.S. health authorities have said all vaccines approved by the United States Food and Drug Administration and the World Health Organization would be accepted for entry by air.
British lawmakers debate standards in Parliament amid a widespread outcry over allegations of sleaze and corruption that followed an attempt by the government to overhaul the legislature's disciplinary process. We have Patricia Rodriguez reporting.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson on Monday rejected pressure to appear at an emergency debate on parliamentary standards, where he was accused of leading his party through the sewers following days of sleaze claims. The debate was held as calls mounted for an independent inquiry into allegations of apparent corruption and inappropriate conduct within the Conservative Party and the government. Last week, the government caused outrage by trying to overhaul Parliament's internal disciplinary process, which would have prevented the 30-day suspension of a Tory MP found to have committed a most serious breach of lobbying rules. Although Johnson abandoned the unprecedented move within 24 hours, prompting the lawmaker Owen Paterson to resign from Parliament, it threw the spotlight on a raft of allegations around MPs' behavior. Standing in for Johnson at Monday's debate, Senior Minister Steve Barclay apologized on behalf of the government for the mistake made last week. Let's listen in on the statements made by Government Minister Steve Barclay and Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Set out the government's position today, I would like first and foremost to express my regret and that of my ministerial colleagues over the mistake made last week. We recognise that there are concerns across the House over the standards system and also the process by which possible breaches of the Code of Conduct are investigated. Yet while sincerely held concerns clearly warrant further attention, the manner in which the government approached last week's debate conflated them with the response to an individual case. This House shares a collective interest in ensuring that the Code of Conduct reflects and fosters the highest standards of public life.
Last week, the Prime Minister damaged himself. And despite the bravery of some members opposite, he damaged his party. But most importantly, he damaged our democracy. We are fortunate in this country. Voters may not always agree with politicians, they often don't. But they do trust that disagreements are sincere, that their representatives are acting in the way that they think is in the public interest, and that we can resolve our disagreements. And now today, he does not even have the decency to come here either to defend what he did or to apologise for his actions. Rather than repairing the damage that he's done, the Prime Minister is running scared. When required to lead, he's chosen to hide. His concern, as always, is self-preservation, not the national interest.
A survey for the London Evening Standard newspaper indicated that the popularity of Johnson and the ruling party were falling even before the scandal. Boris Johnson's Conservative Party trailed the Labour Party in the poll, while a majority of adults disagreed that Johnson has what it takes to be a good Prime Minister for the first time since he came to power in 2019. Reporting from London, United Kingdom, I'm Patricia Rodriguez. We live in interesting times.
In other news, teachers and parents are mourning the loss of 26 children who died in a fire at their straw and wood classroom school in Maradi, southern Niger. It comes only 7 months after a similar tragedy in Niamey left 20 dead. Take a look.
daga klase di miliya ita ce da yaran ta sun ka kone tunda muna kuwa faran da suka zo ɗauka yaran su sun yi ta sai kurar an hihi da zana me na kuriya ne kakin su kawo kuriya su ne sun kai ta konewa tunda akwai guda da ya rugo da gudu riga shi ta kama ya rike ne yana tanti zai shi na samu na zuba mai kasa riga ta wuta ta mutu babu maza ba mai ide sai waɗanda suke shigowa faran da kuma alantur sun yi sekurin in su bakin kokari Allah dai ne ya sa yara haka nan ne za su yi shine.
Niger, one of the poorest countries in the world, has tried to fix shortages of school buildings by constructing thousands of straw and wood sheds to serve as classrooms, with children sometimes sitting on the ground. Fires in the highly flammable classrooms are common but rarely results in casualties. 3 days of mourning have been declared in the Maradi region from Tuesday. Isufa Arzika, the Secretary General of the Niger Teachers Union, said his union had alerted officials to the danger of the straw and wood classrooms after the Naimi fire. President Mohamed Bazoum recently promised to replace the wooden structures.
Belarus warned Poland Tuesday against orchestrating provocations along their shared border and denied Warsaw's claims it was behind an unprecedented wave of migrants attempting to cross into the EU country. Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki says in a tweet that an unprecedented wave of migrants trying to illegally enter Poland from Belarus threatens the security of the entire European Union. This hybrid attack of Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko's regime is aimed at all of us, he said. We will not be intimidated and will defend peace in Europe with our other partners from NATO and EU. Belarus denied the charges that it was coordinating the attempted crossings. The Belarusian Defense Ministry called the allegations unfounded and unsubstantiated and accused Poland of deliberately escalating tensions. The latest grim chapter of Europe's migrant crisis saw Washington and Brussels call on Minsk to stop what they describe as an orchestrated influx. Take a look.
The United States strongly condemns the Lukashenko regime's political exploitation and coercion of vulnerable people and the regime's callous and inhumane facilitation of irregular migration flows across its borders. We call on the regime to immediately halt its campaign of orchestrating and coercing irregular migrant flows across its borders. As long as the regime in Belarus refuses to respect its international obligations and commitments, undermines the peace and security of Europe, and continues to repress and abuse people seeking nothing more than to live in freedom, we will continue to pressure Lukashenko and will not lessen our calls for accountability.
On Monday, Poland blocked a bid by hundreds of migrants, mostly from the Middle East, to breach the razor-wire border fence as thousands more massed in the area. Brussels says Lukashenko has encouraged the migrant flow in retaliation for existing EU sanctions imposed over its dismal human rights record. Lukashenko, for his part, has denied the allegations.
In other news, a former nurse who murdered 3 patients by contaminating their intravenous drips with disinfectant was sentenced to life in prison on Tuesday by a Japanese court, according to local media. Take a look. During her trial, 34-year-old Ayumi Koboki admitted to killing the patients in their 70s and 80s 5 years ago in a case that shocked Japan. She had previously told police she may have killed 20 people over just 2 months, but later told prosecutors she could not comment on that during the trial. The presiding judge at the Yokohama District Court said he had considered handing Koboki the death sentence, according to public broadcaster NHK. Now, according to the judge, she said she regrets her actions and wants to pay for her crime, and there's a chance she will be reformed, and I couldn't help but to hesitate over Prosecutors had demanded a death sentence for Kuboki, but the nurse's lawyers reportedly argued that she suffered depression due to stress over the deaths of her patients and had diminished capacity. Kuboki had told the court she did not want to be blamed by family members when something wrong happened to her patients when she was on her shift, and felt relieved when one of the victims died. The son of one of the victims said he was not happy with the ruling.
A 22-year-old Ukrainian who was arrested in Poland, has been indicted in the United States as part of a global operation against ransomware attacks, including the high-profile July hack of its software or of IT software company Kaseya, according to officials on Monday. Yaroslav Fasinski, who was detained in Poland on October 8, was the most prominent of several people whose arrests were announced on Monday by U.S. and European authorities. Take a look.
The Justice Department has seized $6.1 million tied to the ransom proceeds of another alleged REvil ransomware attacker, Russian national Yevgeny Polyanin. As set forth in the public filings related to the seizure, Polyanin, whom we also charged by indictment, is alleged to have conducted approximately 3,000 ransomware attacks. Polyanin's ransomware attacks affected numerous companies and entities across the United States, including law enforcement agencies and municipalities throughout the state of Texas. Polyanin ultimately extorted approximately $13 million from his victims. To date, our evil ransomware has been deployed on approximately 175,000 computers worldwide, with at least $200 million paid in ransom. As a result of the Kaseya attack, businesses that relied on Kaseya services across the United States and around the world were impacted. 6 weeks later, on August.
Eagle News will be back with more stories. Please don't go away.
Alam namin ang iyong pagsisikap. Dama namin ang iyong mga sakripisyo. Kita namin ang pagharap mo sa bawat pagsubok. Kaya sa kabila ng mga hamon ng buhay, nandito kami para umalalay. Kasi katulad mo, gusto rin namin ang magandang bukas para sa kanya. Hatid namin ang dekalidad na edukasyon at makabagong pasilidad sa abot kayang halaga. Kaya huwag ka na mangamba. Sasamahan ka namin tuparin ang mga pangarap niya. Maaasahan mong sulit dito ang mga pinagsikapan mo. Sa aming mga makabagong pasilidad at sistema ng edukasyon. Mailalabas natin ang aking talino at mga kakayahan niya. Kahit sa munting halaga, makakasiguro ka na makakasabay siya sa mabilis na pag-ikot ng mundo. Sa New Era, karamay mo kami sa bawat hamon. Kaagapay mo kami sa bawat hakbang. Kasama mo kami sa bawat ngiti at tagumpay.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
I'm Alex Calleja, isang podcaster, YouTuber, writer, director, at isang stand-up comedian for more than 12 years. Kaya naman, heto na ang funniest Nakawall Videos! Ang natatanging show na bubusugin ang buong sambayanan sa katatawanan! Ito ang bagong tambayan ng buong pamilya at barkada. Mula Lunes hanggang Biyernes nyo kami makakasama tuwing 4:30 p.m. Dito lang sa Net 25. Dito, mapapanood natin ang best comedy videos na hinanap pa namin sa kasuluk-sulukan ng internet. So ano pang hinihintay nyo? Join na sa pinakabago at pinakamasayang afternoon habit ng tawanan at kulitan, ang funniest Nakawall Videos!
Welcome back. Worldwide trademark filing activity boomed in 2020, defying a global economic downturn and signaling vibrant entrepreneurship and the introduction of new goods and services in response to the pandemic, according to a new report by the World Intellectual Property Organization, or WIPO. WIPO's World Intellectual Property Indicators report also showed that patent and industrial designs filing activity rebounded in 2020, illustrating the resilience of human innovation even amid the dire global health situation. Take a look.
The figures we are releasing today refers to 2020. They capture for the first time how the global intellectual property system has fared as the COVID-19 pandemic unfolded in the spring of last year. In a nutshell, our data show that intellectual property filings were resilient in 2020, despite the deepest economic shock in many decades. Innovators around the world filed around 3.3 million patent applications in 2020, up 1.6 on 2019. Around 13.4 million trademark applications covering 17.2 million classes were filed worldwide in 2020, up, and this is impressive figure, 13.7 on 2019, making an 11 successive year of growth.
We find that the strong growth in global trademark filing activity was driven by robust growth in trademark filings related to advertising and business management. This is probably not so surprising in a longer-term trend, but what we also find is that the growth was driven by pharmaceuticals and a category which is called surgical, medical, and dental goods, which in the context of the pandemic is the category of trademark filings relating to goods falling into the PPE, into the personal protective equipment categories.
The annual report collects and analyzes IP data to inform policymakers, business leaders, investors, academics, and others seeking macro trends in innovation and creativity.
Finally, in our news, 4 astronauts returned to Earth in a SpaceX craft after spending 6 months on the International Space Station, a NASA live broadcast showed, marking the end of a busy mission. The international crew conducted thousands of experiments in orbit and helped upgrade the solar panels on the ISS during their Crew 2 mission. Its descent, slowed by 4 huge parachutes, their Dragon spacecraft, dubbed Endeavour, splashed down in the Gulf of Mexico at 10:33 p.m. or 3:33 GMT Tuesday, before it was lifted onto a recovery ship. NASA astronauts Megan MacArthur and Shane Kimbrough, Akihiro Hoshide of Japan, and Frenchman Thomas Pesquet from the European Space Agency were then taken out of the capsule and placed on stretchers as a precautionary measure. Human bodies need to readjust to gravity after extended periods in space. The ISS activities of the Crew 2 astronauts included documenting the surface of the Earth to record human-caused changes and natural events, growing hatch chili peppers, and studying worms to better understand human health changes in space. Their journey back to Earth began when Endeavour undocked from the ISS at 2:05 p.m. or 19:05 GMT, according to NASA.
Outside of Crew Dragon Endeavour, being translated over to the stretcher.
I want some of those chili peppers. And that's it for tonight's broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I am CJ Hero. The news continues tomorrow.
And at the end of the day, there remains so much more to be grateful for. We'll see you back tomorrow. I'm Alma Angeles, and
we live
in interesting times.
This program is supported by SMC Global Power. Solusyon, aksyon, re-responde na ang bagong aksyonan ng bayan. Abangan, responde, mata ng mamamayan. Dito sa Net 25.
And sing this song to all of our age, for these are the questions we've got to face. For in this cycle that we call life, we are the ones who are next in line.